Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today we'll be doing a review of the 2011 book by David McCullough, The Greater Journey, Americans in Paris. David Gaub McCullough, born the 7th of July 1933 in Pittsburgh, died the 7th of August 2022 in Hingham, Massachusetts. One of the US's foremost popular historians, McCullough became famous for his sweeping list of books comprising some of America's most enterprising and significant figures and stories. His detailed depictions of scenes and eras using beautifully descriptive language made his books massive successes at bridging the gap between history nuts and the common person, and two of the books he wrote ended up going on to win Pulitzer Prizes. For my part, I have read four McCullough books prior to The Greater Journey. I read the 2015 book on the Wright brothers some years ago, which was very good. And for this deep dive, I have read 1776, which was also very good, John Adams, which was stellar, and his last work before his death, 2019's The Pioneers, which was unfortunately my least favorite of the bunch. And after reading The Greater Journey, I don't think I disliked it quite as much as The Pioneers, but it suffers from a lot of the same problems. The book's subtitle is Americans in Paris, which more or less previews the episodic nature of the narrative. It is about just that, Americans who visited Paris throughout the 19th century and used the French city as inspirations for their own aspirations. McCullough tracks about 75 years worth of different notable Americans going to Paris, including James Fenimore Cooper, Samuel Morse, Elizabeth Blackwell, and Mary Cassatt. And in telling their stories, he also paints a history of Paris and the various socio-political revolutions that took place during that time. I do enjoy that perspective on the history because it comes from people who are outsiders to the culture, but who are also living through these moments very actively, acting like reporters on their own lives. The dichotomy here is quite fascinating. But the downside to McCullough's rich cast of characters and the scope of history he's biting off is that the book doesn't have any sort of clear protagonist. The closest thing to a protagonist we have might be the city itself, with a revolving door of characters that act out their stories in the city and then leave. The timeline of the story isn't an issue because, again, McCullough is writing about 75 years worth of history, which is absolutely a manageable time frame. But because he's working with probably a dozen different significant characters, if not more, there's a lot of narrative disruption that has to happen because McCullough has to explain who these characters are and how they got to Paris in the first place. At some point, these tales tend to blend together a bit, and it all ends up coming off sounding like a bunch of rich socialites taking a trip to Europe to mingle with the social elites and just reinforce how far removed they were from common society. Maybe that's not an entirely fair perspective, and certainly McCullough doesn't seem especially interested in exploring that perspective in his writing, but even a non-critical McCullough can inspire genuine interest in the subjects he's writing about. I think it's one of his greatest strengths as a writer, growing a passion for something by obsessively researching it and then sharing both that passion and that research in such a vivid and exciting way. And The Greater Journey doesn't lack for those moments. Some of my favorites come in the closing chapters where McCullough is talking about American painters and their interactions with the French Impressionist movement and figures like Degas. It's the closest we get to a consistent narrative throughout the book, especially since the American characters in these scenes, like Cassatt and George Healey, spent decades in Paris rather than a couple of years. The quality of the writing instills a certain floor with David McCullough books that prevents any of them from being completely worthless, and it certainly saves this one from mediocrity. I think the folks who I'd recommend this book to would be those who enjoy Paris in general, but maybe have never been, and thus maybe a surface-level depiction of how Americans interacted with the culture back in the day would be of interest to you. For history buffs, I think this just kind of retells a bunch of stories that you could find in other more detailed biographies, so probably go to those first. And yeah, that is about it. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Tell a friend as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. Bye now.